Hello everyone and welcome to another of my video tutorials for the concept of introduction to business. Now, just because others see some things in life as ethical doesn't mean that everyone or even just you will agree with that. This is not always a yes or no, right, wrong, binary type answer to everything we see throughout our lives. Now, we as individuals will all develop a personal code of ethics that we carry over into our jobs. Sometimes we decide what is ethical based on what is acceptable to others, even though the behavior may be unethical. So with this video, this will be a discussion where we will look at ethics and social responsibility. More specifically, that of business ethics and the role of a formal code of ethics, as well as business approaches to social responsibility. I've also discussed how the concept of social responsibility applies both to environmental issues and to a firm's relationships with its customers, employees, and investors, as we all know its stakeholders, as well as we'll look at how issues of social responsibility and ethics affect small business. So first, let's dive right into what are ethics, and specifically ethics in the workplace. Now, ethics are beliefs about wrong and right or bad and good. We all pretty much know that. Well, ethical behavior conforms to individual beliefs and social norms about what is right and wrong. Therefore, business ethics refer to ethical or unethical behaviors by employees in the context of their jobs. Now let's talk a little bit about individual ethics. I just said that ethics are beliefs about right and wrong or bad and good. And these ethics are based on individual beliefs and social concepts. Thus, they're going to vary person to person, situation to situation, and amongst cultures. I want to bring up one called the law in the real world. Societies adopt formal laws that reflect ethical standards. However, in real world situations, sometimes these are difficult to interpret. Now, individuals are going to have their own values and morals. Individuals' personal codes of ethics are going to be determined by a combination of several factors in life. And this is all going to start from the beginning with their childhood and what they experience in their worlds. Over time, our peers and experiences are going to contribute to the ethical beliefs and behaviors that influence us as individuals. So our ethics are going to then transform into our ethical behaviors. These ethical behaviors that are on the foundation of the ethics that we grow into throughout our lives are going to transform into the business world, and we're going to get to the field of managerial ethics. And these are the standards behavior that guide individual managers in their daily work. And there's a few different categories here with managerial ethics. We're going to see the behavior towards employees. This is that category that covers the hiring and firing, increases or decreases in wages, what kind of working conditions are provided, and privacy and respect. Then we have the second managerial ethic behavior, and that's behavior towards the organization. There are going to be conflicts of interest, confidentiality, and honesty are ethical issues. A conflict of interest, occurs when an activity may benefit the individual to the detriment of the organization. Thankfully, many organizations have policies in place that forbid buyers and other personnel from accepting gifts from suppliers or customers which will help them avoid even the appearance of any type of bribery or unethical acts. Such things as padding expense accounts and taking office supplies for personal use are other examples of problems that occur toward the organization. Third, we have the behavior towards other economic agents. So ethics will also come into play in the relationship between a firm and a number of primary agents of interest, such as the customers, our suppliers, even our stockholders, or unions, competitors even. So as an example here, we may see that in some countries, bribes may be a normal part of doing business. But in other countries, it's illegal to accept those bribes. So that is not a good business practice. But It just varies from area to area. So with so much happening in our daily business lives, we need to understand what is ethical behavior and what is unethical behavior. Now, ethical behavior is that behavior that conforms to individual beliefs and social norms about what's right and what's good. Unethical behavior, however, is that behavior that conforms to individual beliefs and social norms about what is defined as wrong or obviously bad. So, even though there's gray and white, ones and zeros, right or wrong, it is a muddled area, but we will learn in our workplaces that behavior that conforms to the social norms about what is right and what is wrong. So we will be able to distinguish between ethical, unethical behavior. Unfortunately, when we do international business, sometimes this is where it gets a little muddy. So just know that when you are working in other countries, as an example, understand the importance of managerial ethics and learn the standards and behaviors that are going to guide managers in those areas based on those norms and the ethics that are acceptable or unacceptable in those areas. Well, how do we do this? Well, we need to have the ability to assess ethical behavior. Now, really, this is a simple process that helps when making ethical decisions for a person. And there's 3 steps. You can see those here on the left. We're going to gather relevant factual information. Then once we've gathered that information, we're going to analyze the facts to determine the most appropriate moral values. And lastly, we're going to make an ethical decision based on the rightness or wrongness of the proposed activity or policy. Now, although ethical judgments are not always easy to make or even always agreed upon, this simple process does at least give us a good starting point for an ethical decision-making process. And for us to be able to fully assess the ethics of a specific behavior, we are going to need a more complex perspective. Ethical norms come into play here. And I want you to consider 4 norms and the issues that they entail. First one here, and you can see this in the top left, these are utility, rights, justice, and caring. And there's some simple questions you can ask yourself when you're looking at these 4 ethical norms. With utility, ask yourself, does a particular act optimize the benefits to those who are affected by it? With rights, does it respect the others of all the individuals that are involved? The other norm, justice, ask yourself, is it consistent with what's fair? And then lastly, the 4th norm, caring, is it consistent with people's responsibilities to each other? And then look as we move down through this chart here, answer with each of those, no or yes, and where you answer, then you move ahead. If all the criteria is met, then obviously the act or policy that's in place is ethical. If not, if one or all, then there's an ethical dilemma here. It's not ethical. Many companies set up codes of conduct to develop clear ethical positions on how the organization and its employees are to conduct business. The single most effective step a company can take is to demonstrate the top management's support of these ethical standards. And the way that we are going to put these in place, we're going to adopt written codes and then institute ethical programs. So with adopting written codes, most major corporations have a written code of ethics. While business strategies and practices can change, the organization's overall core principles and values should definitely not. And then instituting ethical programs. Ethical responses can be learned through experience. So companies and organizations must take the responsibility for educating its employees. An example of this is we should be requiring managers, if not all employees, to go through regular ethics training to remind them of that importance of ethical decision making, and in case there's any updates that need to be shared with current laws or regulations that might have changed since the last time that they had this key training. Now, I just talked about core principles and organizational values. In this chart, you can see that in the center, our core principles and organizational values are unchanging. They should never truly change. Our objectives as an organization, they're going to change. And our strategies and the practices that we have in place, those are going to be changed pretty frequently. But at the heart of everything, the core principles and the values that we have as an organization place should be unchanging. Now, earlier you heard me mention the term social responsibility. Now, this refers to the overall way in which a business itself tries to balance its commitments to the relevant groups and individuals within its social environment. So most companies are going to strive to be ethically responsible to the organization stakeholders. And really there's 5 main groups of stakeholders we'll take a look at that our organizations should try to be ethically responsible to. Those are obviously our customers, our employees, our investors, suppliers, and our local and international communities. Now with customers, critical factors include changing fair prices, honoring our warranties that we have in place. If we've set some delivery commitments, we make sure that we meet those delivery commitments, as well as having a firm standing behind the quality of our products. With our employees, treating our workers fairly, making them a part of the overall organization's team, and respecting their dignity and basic human needs are going to promote a company's reputation. And I'm sure some of you can sit back and think about places you've worked at where a lack of this has promoted a bad reputation for a specific company. Another of our stakeholders in our stakeholder model of responsibility here are the investors. Now, managers, we must follow proper accounting procedures, provide appropriate information to our shareholders, and manage the organization to protect shareholder rights investments. And you can go out and search the internet for stories that can give you clear evidence of where this has been an issue. I'm not going to mention any here. I want you to go out and look for some yourself, and some of you probably already have some going through your head. All right, the 4th group I mentioned was suppliers. Partnership agreements or arrangements with our suppliers can enhance market image and firm reputation. By not doing so, you can see where that can go the opposite way. So keeping suppliers informed about future plans, negotiating delivery schedules and prices that are acceptable to both firms build relationships with our suppliers. They build good, strong relationships with our suppliers. And the last one I mentioned here are our local and international communities. Contributing to local and global programs has a very positive impact on the community, both locally and internationally. And it can, doing something internationally can affect us locally as well. So make sure that we find ways to contribute to various programs to have that positive impact on your communities. One more keynote here going back to employees, because employees are the foundation of every organization. Just know that a company that provides its employees with equal opportunities without regard to their sex, race, or any other irrelevant factor is the ability for that company to meet both its legal and its social responsibilities as an organization. Make sure that you see this is being enforced in your organizations, and I'm sure you will see posters up and you will have training that are going to emphasize this responsibility towards employees in your organizations. Now, a term I want to talk about now is the concept of accountability. Now, the expectation of this is the expanded expectation of the role for businesses in protecting and enhancing the general welfare of society. So controlling pollution is a significant challenge for contemporary businesses, but this is the responsibility toward the environment we must have. We must have that accountability for being responsible towards our environments. And 3 areas that you've probably heard of that I want to talk about are air pollution, water pollution, and land pollution. Now, under current laws, many companies must install special devices to limit their pollutants that they are going to expel into the air. I mean, it's expensive to do this, but that is our social responsibility. Water pollution, a lot of new legislation and increased awareness of chemical and waste dumping and the resulting dangers have led to improved water quality in many areas of the country. We still see instances where this business or that business gets some heavy fines because of water pollution, but thanks to the legislation and increased awareness, we are being more active about this and making sure that those companies that do try to get away with that are penalized. It's no longer okay to just dump and let it be somebody else's problem. All right, land pollution. Proper toxic waste disposal and recycling programs are allowing our organizations to help restore land quality and to prevent further contamination. And I'm sure a lot of you are doing this at home as well by recycling. And this is really, we talk about recycling where it's like, oh, we're going to separate some things and send it off and someone else will do something with it. And not really knowing what recycling is. Recycling is just the reconversion of our waste materials into useful products. And this has become an issue not only for municipal and state governments, but also for companies engaged in high waste activities. If you think about some of the companies, and let's just take a food business. Let's say, you go to your local fast food place and you're driving through the drive-thru, and I bet you can easily see that they got these big dumpsters in the back, and there's all kinds of different wastes that are just thrown on there. That's contributing to land pollution. Instead of doing proper recycling, like you are probably doing at home, or your organizations may be doing, where cardboard's going to one area, wood such as pallets and things are going to another area, and our e-waste such as our electronics, whether it's phones or computers, those are going to be e-cycled. Sadly, not all organizations are looking at the land pollution, but hopefully as we become better managers and influence others, that social responsibility will only continue to increase. Besides this responsibility towards the environment, we also have a responsibility towards our customers with consumer rights, unfair pricing, ethics in advertising. Those are just a few areas. And with consumer rights, consumerism is that social activism dedicated to protecting the rights of consumers in their dealings with our businesses. Unfair pricing, this is definitely an area of responsibility towards our customers. Collusion, you might have heard this term. This occurs when 2 or more firms agree to collaborate on wrongful acts, such as price fixing or price gouging. And that's really bad, especially when they respond to an increased demand and then they steep the prices and gouge us. Everyone's example when it comes to price gouging is always when it comes to gas prices. Consumers also deserve to be given product information that is truthful and not misleading, as well as information that is not morally objectionable. This is where I was talking about with ethics in advertising. And I have no doubt that each of you can think of advertisements right now that the product information isn't truthful or the advertisement is very misleading. So try to think about your customers and being responsible towards them. Another responsibility we have is towards our investors. Now, this is really all about financial mismanagement. Insider trading, now this occurs when someone uses confidential information to benefit from the purchase or sale of stocks. If you want a prime example of this and what happens when you do that, you can look up the Martha Stewart incident, and you will see a prime example of this insider trading issue. Now, misrepresentation of finances is where unethical managers project profits that they do not expect to get, or hide the losses and expenses that they've incurred to help boost paper profits so it looks better on paper. And here I've got listed to a misrepresentation of finances. Now, in maintaining and reporting its financial status, every organization must conform to generally accepted accounting principles. And there are lots of cases of misrepresentation of finances. You can look up Sarbanes-Oxley Act and see an example where this comes from the Enron scandal as to now why we have these SOX, or Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and we have to do all of this auditing for financial reasons each year. Well, we've talked about social responsibility. Well, how about implementing social responsibility programs in our organizations? Here are the 4 approaches that we see towards social responsibility. You can see the lowest levels of social responsibility on the left, where we start with the obstructionist stance, where we get a very high level of social responsibility on the far end with our proactive stance. So the obstructional stance here on the left side, this is where organizations do as little as possible to solve social or environmental problems, and they have little regard for ethical conduct. And they will even go to great lengths to deny or cover up wrongdoing. I'm sure you can see that this is not the end of this scale that you want your organization to be in. As we move a little bit closer towards the highest level of responsibility, just a little bit, we see the defensive stance. This is where organizations will do everything that is required of them legally, but nothing more. So they're just standing on the line, but they're not trying to go above and beyond. Then we move to the accommodative stance. This is where the organization are going to meet its legal and ethical requirements, but will also go further in certain cases, such as if it can be convinced that given programs are worthy of their support. And then that highest level of social responsibility approach is the proactive stance. This is where firms that adopt this approach take to heart the arguments in favor of social responsibility. And they view themselves as citizens in that society. They indicate sincere commitment to improve general social welfare and surpass the accommodative stance by proactively seeking opportunities to contribute to their social responsibilities. Now, when it comes to small businesses, many big business responses to ethical and social responsibilities and responsible issues apply to small businesses. The real difference between the responses and the responsibility issues between small businesses and big businesses are primarily differences of scale. Now, small business owners are faced by the same ethical dilemmas as large companies that we more frequently read about. It's important that the small companies develop the same ethical policies and procedures like their larger counterparts so that they are maintaining those social responsibility. A key to a business's success is to decide in advance how to respond to the issues that underlie all questions of ethical and social responsibility. I'm sure that just by this diagram of the stances of social responsibility, you can see where, regardless of what size you are, based on what stance you take, how you are going to succeed or not succeed as a business, and which area you want to see your organizations at on this scale of stances. And remember that social responsibility programs must be initiated and supported by those members of top management, because ultimately a social responsibility program is only going to be effective if it involves everyone in the organization. And if our top management is supporting it and leading by example, then that will just trickle down through all the members in our organization. Now, one element that is especially important of social responsibility is the relationship between the businesses, large and small, and the governments. Now, the government, whether it be state, local government, or even national government, are attempt to shape social responsibility practices through both direct and indirect channels. Direct influence most frequently is manifested through what we know as regulation. And regulations are just that establishment of laws and rules that dictate what organizations can or cannot do or should not do. Whereas indirect influence can take a number of forms, most notably through taxation policies. Now, for example, with indirect regulation, the government can indirectly influence the social responsibility of an organization through various tax codes. In effect, the government can influence how organizations spend their social responsibility dollars by providing greater or lesser tax incentives. Well, that tells us how government influences business. Let's now take a look at how businesses influence the government. Now, remember, just as governments can influence businesses, so too can businesses influence the government through personal contacts, because many corporate executives and political leaders travel in the same social circles. So those personal contacts and networks offer one method of influence. We also have lobbying. This is the use of person or groups to formally represent an organization or a group of organizations before these political bodies. And this is definitely a very effective way to influence government. We also have political action committees. These are special organizations that are created to solicit or get money and then distribute it to different political candidates. Favors is another influence on the way business can influence the government, because organizations sometimes rely on these favors as tactics to gain support for initiatives. Although these favors may be illegal, they are still subject to criticism. Now, when it comes to managing social responsibility, the demands for social responsibility placed on contemporary organizations by an increasingly sophisticated and educated public are definitely stronger than ever. So organizations should view social responsibility as a major challenge that requires careful planning, lots of decision making, lots of consideration, and evaluation. So there's a formal organizational dimension here. Legal compliance. This is the extent to which an organization conforms to the different laws, whether they be state laws, federal laws, even international laws. So keep in mind, in some instances, perfectly legal accounting practices have still resulted in deception as well as other problems. Ethical compliance. This is the extent to which members of an organization follow basic ethical as well as legal standards of behavior. And then another one we have is philanthropic giving, which is the awarding of funds or gifts to charities or other worthy causes. This is another dimension of managing social responsibility. Now, besides the legal compliance, ethical compliance, and philanthropic giving, as all three of those are formal organizational dimensions, we also have informal organizational dimensions we should talk about as well. One of those will be organizational leadership and culture. These can go a long way towards defining the social responsibility stance that an organization as well as the members of that organization will adopt. Ethical leadership often sets the tone for the entire organization. I've mentioned that before. Another informal organizational dimension is whistleblowing, and you might have heard this term, especially relevant over the last 5 to 10 years. This is that disclosure of information by an employee of any type of illegal or unethical conduct that they witness on part of others within an organization. How an organization responds to this whistleblowing practice often illustrates its stance on social responsibility. So how that organization responds to the report of someone being ethical definitely reflects what that organization feels about social responsibility. Well, now that we know a little bit about formal and informal organizational dilemmas, let's talk about evaluating social responsibility. To make sure the efforts are producing are the desired benefits, any business that is serious about social responsibility must apply the concept of control to social responsibility. Many organizations now require all employees to read their guidelines or their code of ethics and then sign a statement agreeing to abide by those code of ethics. A business should also evaluate how it responds to instances of questionable legal or ethical conduct that occurs within that organization. More formally, an organization may actually evaluate the effectiveness of its social responsibility efforts. Some businesses occasionally conduct a corporate social audit, which is a formal and very thorough analysis of the effectiveness of a firm's overall social performance. This is something that you may or may not see depending on where you fit in the organization, but more than likely, if your organization is conducting a corporate social audit, that will be reflective of the acts that you see of the organization and how it's handling social responsibility. And you'll see this through the different areas that we've already talked about throughout this lesson. And that is all I have for this lesson on understanding business ethics and social responsibility. It's a lot of information, but there's a lot to think about too. So I hope throughout this lecture that you've been able to think about some cases, or maybe even some of these concepts made you want to go out and look up some information to go beyond just this lecture. Thank you guys for following along. I appreciate you, and I hope that you're finding the information in these videos helpful and hopefully creating a little bit more of a desire for you to learn more. Take care and have a great day.